Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're jumping headfirst into the really fascinating, sometimes pretty surprising, world of how countries manage their irrigation water.
Yeah, we're focusing specifically on West and Central Asia.
And we're using this great overview as our guide, looking at, well, the different ways irrigation management transfer, people call it IMT, has paid out across 7 countries there.
Exactly. It's a real spectrum of experiences.
Our mission really is to unpack this source material, get a quick but, solid handle on how these reforms actually unfolded,
You see everything from places where IMT seems pretty well embedded.
to others where it was tried and then, whoosh, completely reversed.
And it really matters because, irrigation is just fundamental to farming in that part of the world.
Absolutely. How that water gets managed impacts everything, yields people's livelihoods.
Food security for millions, really. So understanding what works, what doesn't when you try to hand over management to users, it's pretty critical.
Totally agree. So how are we going to tackle this?
Well, I think we should look at each country, check out its water governance setup, how important irrigation is.
And then dig into the specifics of their IMT story, if they even have one.
Right. Maybe start with 2 contrasting cases to kind of set the extreme.
Good idea. And then
Yeah.
maybe look at those reversals.
Yeah, the rollbacks and reversals are fascinating. And then finish with the ones still sort of figuring things out.
Sounds like a plan. Let's kick off with those contrasts then. How about Turkey and Turkmenistan? They seem like polar opposites based on this overview.
Definitely. Let's start with Turkey. It often comes up as like the positive example, right? A benchmark for IMT success.
Yeah, the source describes a very structured water governance system,
Yeah.
multi-layered.
It is. You've got the Ministry of Agriculture and Forestry at the top. Then these central directorates, 25 river basin water boards, regional offices, local branches. It's quite a hierarchy.
Very organized. And irrigation is huge there. What's the scale we're talking about?
Well, nationally, something like 7.1 million hectares irrigated. And the key thing for IMT is that a big chunk of that, around 3 million hectares, so like 42% has been transferred.
Transferred to who, mainly?
Mostly to these irrigation unions, IOUs. Though you also see some cooperatives and villages involved too.
And this transfer wasn't overnight, was it? When did it start?
No, it kicked off back in 1993. The number of these IUs grew steadily, peaking around 393 in 2014.
But then something changed. The source mentions a law in 2018.
Right, the 2018 IU law. And it wasn't about ditching IMT. It was actually meant to consolidate and strengthen the existing unions, make them more robust.
And did it work? What was the effect?
Big effect. The number of unions basically got cut in half.
Really?
Yeah, and this is crucial, the area each one managed more than doubled. The average is now around 13,400 hectares per IU.
So fewer unions, but much bigger, potentially stronger ones. That consolidation seems like a deliberate move to sustain the system.
Exactly. That proactive adaptation, using legislation to reshape the model, seems why Turkey is still seen as that, reference point for successful IMT. It shows long-term commitment.
Okay, really clear structure and adaptation. Now let's flip completely. Turkmenistan.
Right. The other end of the spectrum. Strong central control, and basically no formal IMP has happened.
So their water governance is very different.
Extremely. It's all under the Cabinet of Ministers, managed by the State Committee for Water Management. Then it goes down through provinces, districts.
5 provinces, 50 districts, the source says.
Yeah, and special bodies for big water systems like the Karakum Canal, very top-down.
And their irrigation setup. How much land?
About 1.6 million hectares irrigated. And a lot of that, 870,000 hectares, is managed by what they call Dehan associations.
Which are like post-Soviet collective farms.
Sort of, yeah. They replaced the old Soviet structures, though their numbers have actually dropped a bit since the 90s.
But crucially, no water user associations. No WUAs like we see elsewhere.
Nope. The source is clear. Formal WUAs were never set up. There was a small pilot of informal groups between 2011 and 2017. But it just didn't scale up. It didn't lead anywhere broader.
So Turkmenistan is effectively outside the whole IMT movement for now.
Pretty much. There might be future possibilities, maybe involving local governments, but currently it's state-controlled irrigation.
It's such a stark contrast. You really see how the basic government approach shapes whether user management is even considered.
Absolutely. Okay, so we've seen the extremes. What about the middle ground, or maybe places that tried IMT and then pulled back?
Yeah, let's look at Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan.
That's
Source suggests they both adopted IMT, but then things went sideways, leading to scalebacks or even full reversals.
right. Let's take Kazakhstan first. They did roll out WUAs, or their version anyway.
They have a Ministry of Water Resources, regional branches, basin inspectorates. A structure is there.
Yeah, Kazwadkos runs the regional operations. They irrigate about 1.2 million hectares.
And the key point from the source.
Is that 780,000 hectares used to be managed by almost 500 rural water user cooperatives. That was their WUA system.
Used to be, so what happened?
Well, since around 2016, the trend reversed. The overview says many of those cooperatives just dissolved or they got pushed aside.
And the state stepped back in.
Seems like it. Service delivery largely went back to state hands. Only, scattered bits of cooperative functions remain. It's a definite rollback.
Makes you wonder why, doesn't it? After setting up nearly 500 of them, was it funding?
Yeah.
Capacity? A policy change?
The source flags the outcome, but yeah, the why is the big question. Why undo a reform on that scale?
Okay, that's a significant scale back. But Uzbekistan sounds even more dramatic, like a complete U-turn.
It really does. Uzbekistan's water governance is described as highly structured, very hierarchical, ministry on top, basin authorities, sub-basin ones.
And now these new district-level bodies, WDSOs.
Exactly. Water delivery service organizations, 159 of them, covering pretty large areas on average.
And their irrigated land is massive, 3.7 million hectares.
Huge. And another big factor the source points out is the rise of these large agri-clusters.
Right, managing a huge chunk of the land now.
A massive chunk, like 65% of irrigated areas involving 80% of farmers.
Right.
That's a fundamental shift in the agricultural landscape itself.
So how did IMT fit into this and what happened?
Well, they had WUAs, lots of them, over 1,700 back in 2010.
Okay.
But then came this reform wave, starting around 2018. First, the WUAs were merged into bigger, district-sized units by 2020.
Consolidation, like in Turkey.
Sort of, but then they were completely abolished in 2022, just gone.
Abolished, yeah.
And replaced this year, 2024, by those state-run WDSOs, which manage, on average, over 23,000 hectares each.
So it's a full reversal. From user-based WUAs back to large-scale state-managed irrigation.
Absolutely. And those agri-clusters seem central to this new model. It suggests a major policy pivot, maybe prioritizing large-scale production over farmer-managed systems.
It's incredible how quickly that happened. A
Yep.
complete dismantling.
It really shows how vulnerable these reforms can be to broader shifts in policy or, political priorities.
Okay, so we've covered success, inaction, rollback, and full reversal. What about countries where WUAs are still around, but maybe struggling or changing?
Right. The source highlights Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, and Azerbaijan as places where IMT is widespread, but things are definitely in flux. They're in transition or under strain.
Let's look at Kyrgyzstan first, described as IMT under strain.
Yeah, their water governance seems a bit more decentralized with the ministry, basin organizations, provincial and district authorities.
And they have these river basin councils for stakeholder input.
Right. Irrigation-wise, about 1 million hectares total, and 3/4 of that is managed by WUAs.
How many WUAs?
Currently 370, serving almost 500,000 farmers, mostly smallholders. They actually peaked at nearly 500 WUAs just last year.
But something's happened recently. The source mentions a sudden change in 2024.
Very sudden and concerning. 121 WUAs covering a pretty big area, 186,000 hectares were just suspended.
Suspended. What did that mean?
Their networks were handed over to local governments. It wasn't gradual. It sounds quite abrupt for those involved.
That creates a lot of uncertainty.
It does. And adding to that, the source notes there's a new water code being drafted. And apparently it doesn't even mention WUAs at all.
Wow. So the whole WUA system's future could be up in the air there.
It really seems that way. Big questions about why the suspension happened and what the new legal framework will mean for user participation.
Okay, that's definitely under strain. What about Tajikistan? The source calls it IMT in transition.
Right. Their governance involves the Ministry of Energy and Water Resources for Policy, using a basin management approach.
With basin administrations and advisory councils.
Yeah. And the actual management on the ground is done by the Agency of Land Reclamation and Irrigation, ALRI. They oversee the schemes.
And how much irrigated land are we talking?
Total cropland is around 760,000 hectares, and over half of that, about 433,000 hectares, is irrigated. And that irrigated area is managed by farmer-based WUAs.
So WUAs are key there.
Yeah. They are, though the source mentions new laws and strategies are being developed, so things are evolving.
Did they also see a peak and then change, like some others?
They did. They peaked at over 400 WUAs in 2019, averaging around 1,000 hectares each. Pretty small.
What?
Then, starting around 2020, they began an enlargement process, similar to Turkey in a way.
Why? What was the goal?
The stated goal, according to the source, was explicitly to improve the economic viability of the WUAs, make them bigger so they could function better financially.
So has the number changed?
Yeah, it's down to 241 WUAs now, but the average area they manage has almost doubled to around 1,800 hectares.
So, like Turkey, they're actively trying to find a more sustainable scale for their WUAs, tackling that economic viability issue head on.
Exactly. It really highlights that getting the scale and the economics right is a crucial ongoing challenge after the initial transfer. It's not just set it and forget it.
Makes sense. Okay, finally, Azerbaijan, also described as IMT reform in transition.
Yep. Their governance involves a water commission and the State Water Resources Agency, with regional and district structures supporting the schemes and also specific WUA support units.
And they have a lot of land under WUA management, right?
A huge amount. Total irrigated area is about 1.49 million hectares. And the source says the vast majority of that 1.32 million hectares, like 90%, is managed by their water user unions or WUJs.
Serving over 1 million small farmers, that's significant.
Definitely. And familiar story, they also had a peak number of WUs over 580 back in 2010.
Followed by consolidation.
Followed by consolidation starting around 2020. Again, reducing the numbers but increasing the average size.
How big are they now, on average?
Pretty substantial, around 4,100 hectares per WU now.
Okay, so consolidation's a clear trend there, too.
Yeah.
But the source mentions something else, a new pilot.
Ah, yes. This sounds quite promising. They're piloting a new model in one district called a Water and Farming Union, a WFU.
Water and farming, so it's broader than just irrigation.
Exactly. It integrates the water delivery side with other farm services, kind of bundling support for farmers.
Interesting. So they're looking beyond just water management to make these unions more valuable and maybe more sustainable.
That seems to be the idea.
Yeah.
Exploring if combining services is the way forward. The source suggests it could potentially be scaled up nationally if the pilot works well.
That's a really interesting innovation, building on the existing WUU system.
Definitely one to watch. It shows that even where IMT is established, the evolution continues.
Wow. Okay, we've covered a huge range there across those 7 countries. If we step back now, what are the main things that jump out from this diverse picture?
I mean, the first thing is just how different the PABs are, isn't it?
Totally.
You've got Turkey's sort of stable, long-term consolidated model, then Turkmenistan, where it's just not happening.
Then the clear rollbacks or reversals in Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan.
Right. And then this ongoing flux in Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, Azerbaijan, facing challenges, consolidating, innovating. It's a real mixed bag.
And it really feels like the outcome in each place is tied to so many things, not just the initial decision to try IMT.
Oh, absolutely. It's deeply linked to the country's specific governance structure, the policy decisions they make after starting reforms.
And the broader context, right? Like those big agri-clusters popping up in Uzbekistan clearly changed the whole equation there.
Exactly. And looking across them, you do see some trends emerging from the source material, like that move towards bigger consolidated user groups in Turkey, Tajikistan, Azerbaijan.
Versus the cases where the state steps back in, like Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, and maybe now Kyrgyzstan, depending on what happens there.
Yeah. So for you, the listener, why does grappling with all this variety matter?
Well, I think it takes us way beyond a simple transferring management is good or bad kind of discussion.
Right. It shows the real world messiness, the complexity.
Yeah, and it offers really valuable lessons about what actually helps these reforms stick long term or what undermines them.
And just how hard it is to just copy-paste a model from one place to another. Context is everything.
There's definitely no single recipe for success here. It's dynamic, it changes.
And it's often influenced by things way outside the irrigation sector itself.
So we've taken a pretty deep dive today into this complex world of irrigation management transfer across West and Central Asia.
We really have. And these cases, all pulled from that overview, they give us crucial clues about what enables, or sadly, what can undermine, sustainable irrigation reform.
And that leaves us with a big question to chew on, doesn't it?
It really does. Based on all these different experiences, the successes, the failures, the ongoing struggles, how do we best adapt our approaches? How can we help communities effectively manage vital resources like water for the long haul, learning from all this?
Definitely something to think about. A lot packed into those 7 country stories.